وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا محمد ذي القدر العظيم وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. Alhamdulillah, in the previous lesson we looked at some of the virtues of prayer, and we emphasized that it's important to learn about, to both learn about and remind oneself of the virtues of various actions, right? Because it gives one a sense of purpose and resolve in doing that, in doing those actions. And one of the central roles of the prophets in general and of the Prophet ﷺ in specific is that he was sent as Bashiran wa Nadhira, as a giver of glad tidings and a warner, right? In the verse that the sisters have on their side, which is unfair, right? Inna arsalnaka shahidan wa mubashiran wa nadhira. Ya ayyuhan nabi, O Prophet, we have sent you as a witness and a bearer of glad tidings, mubashiran, right? And the bearer of glad tidings is both the general glad tidings for the believers, but also the specific glad tidings of the consequence of particular acts and their being pleasing to Allah. وَدَاعِيًا إِلَى اللَّهِ بِإِذْنِهِ, and a caller to Allah by His permission. وَسِرَاجًا مُنِيرًا, and a shining lamp, as a complete example of all that he called to, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So, and we mentioned the specific resources related to that, and that's something that, it's not just something to learn, but something to always remind oneself of. It's something to always remind oneself of. And one of the disciplines of a student of knowledge is that one should always be reinforcing the core of one's knowledge. Right? It's like if you ever studied a martial arts, right? There's some basic moves that you always practice, right? Because everything else is built upon those. So you should never have the attitude, well, I've studied Aqeedah. Right? But it's good to always go back and review those things, not because you don't know them, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَذَكِّرْ فَإِنَّ الذِّكْرَ تَنْفَعُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. Right? So reminders benefit the believers. And that's not just other people. Let me tell you this because it'll benefit you. But the first person who's the first person you call to Allah is yourself, right? So that reminder is important, right? And one of the ways, sometimes if you find yourself slacking off in a particular matter, whatever it may be, read the related guidance on it, which is why having a text like Riyadus Salihin is really important. And texts like that, there's virtue in reading them cover to cover. There's also virtue in referring to them, right? It's a good practice to make. Anything related to one's conduct, to one's character, conduct, religious duties, or the adab of the deen, is invariably, there'll be a chapter regarding it in Riyadus Salihin. And it's good, and that's something one should always dip into. And it's Imam An-Nawawi structured it in a way that is meant to be for the common believer. Right? There's hadith works that are not for the common person, such as Sahih al-Bukhari, right? Which is not written for the common person, right? Sometimes the one hadith, Imam al-Bukhari spliced it into multiple parts, and it's all over the Sahih. And he just assumes, because if you know the chain of transmission, and you know about hadith, you know that these are all part of the same hadith, and this part of the hadith is connected to what is mentioned before, what will be mentioned later on. But you kind of assume that you know what's going on. The chapter headings of Imam al-Bukhari are very subtle. Sometimes there's a chapter heading, but there's no hadiths under it. And if you look in the book of knowledge, there's several examples. It says, where's the hadith? But there's a point that Imam al-Bukhari wanted to make, but he didn't find a hadith at his, according to his standards, related to it. So he mentions the chapter heading, but there's no hadith in it. So what do you do with that? Okay. Sometimes the relationship between the chapter heading and the hadith is very subtle. One of the great Indian hadith masters wrote a 6-volume commentary on the chapter headings of Sahih al-Bukhari, just on what's understood from the chapter headings of Bukhari, not the hadiths in those chapters. But something like Riyadus Salihin is a treasure for every believer. So we looked at that. Now, to look at the outward aspect of the prayer, the valid prayer is a prayer that fulfills the conditions, in which one fulfills the conditions and performs the integrals. Right? So the author, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive him, says, the outward validity of the prayer depends on the fulfillment of its obligatory conditions and integrals. Right? Both conditions and integrals are obligatory. What's the difference between them? The conditions are outside of it. That's a description. It's not a definition. Because, eating mutabbal is outside the prayer as well, but it's not a condition. So what is a condition? How would you define a condition? Go ahead.
A condition is an obligatory action that the validity of the prayer relies upon, that lies outside the prayer.
Yeah. So there's three aspects to the definition of a condition. It's an obligatory action that the validity of the prayer is dependent upon, but that does not, but that the prayer is not, but that is not part of the structure of the prayer itself, or is not part of the structure of the action. Right? So those are conditions. So conditions have to be fulfilled, and we'll look at what those conditions are. An integral has three aspects as well. It's an obligatory action that the validity of the action it is an integral of depends upon, and that is part of the structure of the action. Okay? So there's 7 conditions for the validity of the prayer and 5 integrals. So there's total 12 obligatory matters related to the prayer. 7 that are outside of the prayer itself, and only 5 things in the prayer are obligatory. And you have to do something pretty spectacular not to fulfill those. Everything else is either necessary, is either wajib, or it is sunnah. So if you want to be fancy about it, the obligatory acts of the prayer, they're conditions, and there's 7. Right? Purity, covering one's nakedness, one's awrah, facing the qibla, time, intention, and the opening invocation. And there's 5 actions within the prayer that are obligatory. These are the integrals, which are standing, recitation, bowing, prostration, and the final sitting. And we'll look at these. So, the conditions for the prayer, for the validity of the prayer, are 7. Okay? Purity, covering one's nakedness, facing the qibla, the time, intention, and the opening invocation. So we'll look at each of these one by one, bidhnillahi ta'ala. Now, it's really important to be clear on this point, both for oneself and when clarifying matters for others. These are the only things that the validity of the prayer is dependent upon. These are the only things that you have to fulfill or do. There's things that we'll see that break the prayer, that break the prayer. That those are the things that nullify the prayer. But that's a separate matter. But in terms of what you have to do or fulfill, this is it, nothing else. One of the benefits of knowing these, is that they give you clarity. So if you make a mistake, okay, there's no category in our deen called worrying. Right? Knowledge is described as light. Why? Because it makes things clear. So you know, I didn't do this. Was it a condition? No. Was it integral? No. Is it necessary? No. Don't worry about it. Okay? Or was it obligatory? No. Was it necessary? No. You know, there's no rectification needed. The first two conditions relate to purity. Right? Yeah, to be in a state of purity and to be free of filth. So, to be in a state of purity entails that if you required wudu, that you made wudu. If you required ghusl, that you made ghusl. And we've taken what are the things that require ghusl, those things that require wudu, and the things that require ghusl. If you required ghusl, that you made ghusl. If you required wudu, that you made wudu. If you make ghusl, you're in a state of ritual purity. So if you make ghusl, you don't need to make wudu afterwards. And most of us don't think that thoroughly, but if you made ghusl and then something happened that breaks wudu, you don't have to make ghusl again. You just have to make wudu. Right? Some people, actually the fuqaha discuss it too, because people wonder about that. So that's the first, and we've looked at that condition and what it requires. The second condition for the validity of prayer is that one be free of filth beyond an excusable amount from one's body, one's clothing, and one's place of prayer. So, of course, the command to be in a state of purity is established by the verse of purity. Surah 5, verse 6. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, O you believe, if you stand for prayer, then wash your faces, your arms up to and including the elbows, wipe your heads, and wash your feet up to the ankles. And the rest of the verse. That establishes the obligatory to be in a state of ritual purity for prayer. وَإِن كُنْتُمْ جُنُبًا فَطَّهَّرُوا. If you're in a state of major ritual impurity, then perform a complete bath. So that's the ritual purity. To be free of filth of in one's body, clothing, and place of prayer. The number of texts that affirm it, the most direct text is وَثِيَابَكَ فَطَهِّرْ. What surah is that from? Surah Al-Muddathir. وَثِيَابَكَ فَطَهِّرْ. And your garments purify. This establishes the obligation for your body to be free of filth. How? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَثِيَابَكَ فَطَهِّرْ. And your garments purify. This establishes the obligation of purifying of your body being pure of filth. How? In order for your clothes to be pure, your body has to be pure? Not necessarily. Because if dry filth comes in contact with something pure, filth is not assumed to transfer. Go ahead. Yeah. So this is what's called the indication of the text, right? The dilalatun nas. What does the text express? وَثِيَابَكَ فَطَهِّرْ. What's called the expression of the text, ibaratun nas, is what the text is obviously stating, explicitly stating. Your garment purify. The expression of the text is, you are obligated to ensure that your garments are free of filth. That is the expression of the text. But the text indicates, the text itself, and this is not textual interpretation, the text itself indicates a meaning as well. Imagine if someone told you, make sure your garments are free of filth, and you go, so your son shows up, say make sure your clothes are clean. It's like, you make sure you're wearing clean clothes. So they come wearing clean clothes, but they're pasted in mud underneath. Did they fulfill the command? No. Because what's indicated is be clean. Be clean. So the indication of the text encompasses the body as well. Right? This is called dilalatun nas, which is a meaning that it is not what is stated by the text, but it's the meaning indicated by the text that also applies, right? And that anyone who hears it will understand this. It's not something that requires, it's not a mode of textual interpretation. This is not a meaning understood by scholars, but anyone who knows language would know this. Okay. So that's why, and there's of course other texts that affirm the meaning, but this is the most direct text. There's other texts of the Quran that also entail that one's body and clothing be free of filth. And one's place of prayer. What does it refer to with respect to place of prayer? Does it mean the room that you're praying in? What is entailed by it? Yeah, so the place of prayer is where your limbs themselves come into contact with the ground. So it's literally your place of standing, the place your knees contact the ground, where your forehead touches the ground, where your nose touches the ground, and your hands. That's it. Being close to filth is disliked, but doesn't affect your prayer in any way. So how could you pray on filth without it breaking your prayer? How do you pray on filth without it breaking your prayer? Yes. Yeah, that's cheating. Without a prayer mat. Yes, if you pray on a prayer mat, have you ever wondered why prayer mats are slightly thick? Right? There's a reasoning behind it, but historically they were slightly thick. Because the two sides are considered separate, right? So even if filth did get on the bottom side, the upper side would not be considered filthy. But that's when those are the good old days. But without, if let's say you got imprisoned and they sprayed filth all over the floor so that, just to give you a hard time, what do you do? There's many things you could do. One is if you find a few places where the filth didn't reach, you could technically stand on one place, keep your hands on the other, etc. So as long as, so you're praying on the filth, but your limbs, your feet, knees, hands, forehead are not in touch, don't get in touch with the filth, that is excused. Where avoidable is disliked. So, but being close to filth does not affect the validity of the prayer. It's sunnah to keep away from filth, but not obligatory. What is filth? What is filth? Your answer? Okay, what is filth? Go ahead. Yeah. Yeah. So it's anything that exits from the private parts, or anything that comes out of a wound, or vomit. That's more than a mouthful, right? So anything that comes out from the private parts, urine, excrement, discharge, anything that comes out of a wound, blood or pus, or other any other liquid that is, changed, or or vomit that's a mouthful, right? Even if it's from other than a human being. So that's filth. And we looked at the principles related to purity. So bad smells are not filthy. Something that smells weird is not necessarily filthy, right? The assumption, we have a good opinion not only of people but of things. In the sense that, let's say you decided to go to an Islamophobic camp, ban Sharia in America, right? So you went to this camp and they won't let you pray, right? Because they're like, Muslims are devil worshippers, this, that. So you go to the disabled toilet and you pray there. But these are pretty boisterous folk, so there's all kinds of liquid on the ground, right? They're part of some Christian sect that also uses water in the toilet, let's just say. So there's liquid on the ground. Could you pray on that liquid? Now, of course, it's not an ideal case situation. We're not talking about like what you should do, but what you could do. Can you pray on that ground? Yes. Why? Well, what is assumed about that liquid? It's assumed to be pure. And you ignore the possibilities that you don't do. What if analysis with respect to purity is from the shaitan? Right? Anytime you go into what if, that's from the shaitan. What's mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is you assume purity. And that's the yusr. That's inna hadha deen. This religion is easy. Right? And the ease that Allah has granted us is with respect to purity is the assumption of purity. وَلَنْ يُشَدَّ الدِّينَ أَحَدٌ إِلَّا غَلَبَ. And no one will make this religion difficult upon themselves. Because that what if, we're not called upon to do the what if. And if you're doing it, that's something that you're taking on and it will just overwhelm you. So you ignore it. You ignore it. You ignore it. Same like, you go into, you just made wudu and then you realize that there's some liquid around the toilet. Said, what if one of the kids did this? Just ignore it. Even in terms of cleaning it, you see liquid around the toilet. Is there anything in our deen that tells you, do you have to get on your knees and look at the color, smell it? I know people who actually think of the absurd. You are someone who's a follower of the Prophet ﷺ, the most dignified human being ever. Right? Can you imagine there being the sunnah of sniffing? Right? There's no sunnah of sniffing, that you get on your knees by your toilet and you sniff the liquid. Like, it's absurd. But people get themselves into these kinds of bizarre situations. Don't. What do you assume about that liquid? It's pure. Take some tissue paper, take whatever means of cleaning and just wipe it clean and that's it. But you assume that it's pure. Now, anytime you start saying, what if it was filthy? What if that spread? That is, that is excessiveness in deen. That is not mercy. And we don't go into there, right? We don't go. لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. Allah does not make a soul responsible for more than it is able. And this is what Allah has considered us. This is the general ability, the balanced ability. Beyond that, don't. And that's not from caution. Right? That's not from caution. So, one's body, clothing, and place of prayer being free of filth. The exception is, and there's a certain amount that's excused. Of regular types of filth, how much is excused? Yeah. The extent of 5 centimeters in diameter, which is the size of your inner palm. The inner palm they define as the area where if you held it straight with your fingers normally out, not completely outstretched, normally outstretched, that's how much water there would be there. That kind of area, or about 5 grams in weight, meaning a little. You're neither expected to measure it nor to weigh it. What do you do, Yasa? Is it a little? And the assumption is that yes, that's your assumption. You see some filth, is it a little? Your opening assumption is that it's a little. If you're not sure, what do you stick to? The assumption that it's a little. Unless you're certain that it's more than that. There's no category that I'm not sure. If you're not sure, you stick to the original assumption, which is that it's a little. And that's the filth that we normally deal with. Regular filth, that which comes out of a human being, right? The things that we described, that is considered to be, that's all considered to be heavy filth. There's certain things that are considered light filth, which are typically related to the animals that human beings had to deal with. Livestock, horses, etc. Their urine and excrement particularly their urine would be considered to be light filth. So a lot more of it is excused, especially because farmers and others would have to deal with it. So there, up to a quarter of one's body or garment it would be excused if one was affected by light filth. So there's more of it is excused. So those are the two conditions related to purity. Then there's conditions related to covering, right? Which is clothing one's nakedness. Right? The awra, right? And for men, that is from navel up to and including the knee. And the knee in the Hanafi school is part of the awra. And that's from all sides. Right? From all sides. And men have to be careful, as we emphasize, particularly when they bow, because with respect to covering oneself, it's obligatory, not just that one be covered, but it's also obligatory that one not get uncovered in normal circumstances. There's exceptional cases that you're wearing a shalwar and you don't know how to tie the knot properly, and so the string was hanging and it got caught in something that was lying on the ground, and your shalwar fell off or something. First time it'd be excusable, but then learn a lesson, right? But it's also obligatory that one's awra not get uncovered in normal circumstances. Whether with respect to the navel, and it's a common problem in ruku and sujood for men, and it's not excusable, right? Likewise, if you're playing sports and stuff, that the knee needs to be covered and needs to remain covered, right? So one takes the means for that. And for women, the awra is for prayer and in front of non-immediate family of the opposite sex is everything except the hands, feet, and face. It should normally be the face, the hands, and feet. That's the logical order. So this is called al-nashr al-mushawwash. This is listing something in a confused order. Because the face is, with respect to the prayer, etc., is agreed upon as not being awrah. Right? The hands and feet, there's some more discussion on, but the face itself is that which is described in wudu, from the top of the forehead till the bottom of the chin, from earlobe to earlobe. Practically, the question that arises is, what about the area under the chin? Right? What about the area under the chin? The fuqaha generally don't talk about that. It is understood that one has to cover up till the top of the neck. Right? Till the top of the neck. If someone wants to be cautious about it, the area under the chin, if they wish to cover it, that's a separate matter, but it's not considered, because it doesn't show. Shaykh Adib Kala said it doesn't show. Right? In normal circumstances. And it's not that way, it would not be considered awrah. If someone wishes to cover up till the bottom of their chin, that's up to them, but in terms of the awrah, it is from top of the forehead to the bottom of the chin, from earlobe to earlobe. The hands are up to the wrist bones, right? And again, one takes the means that it is covered and it remains and that it doesn't get uncovered. And the feet are up to the ankles, right? And the same principle applies. So this applies in the prayer and outside the prayer. So if one's out in the public, etc. So in the Hanafi school, women don't have to cover their feet, but above the feet is considered awrah. So in summer months, etc., they don't want to wear they don't want to wear socks. But one should cover in a way that in walking, in sitting, going up the stairs, whatever, that the awrah remains covered, and that's something that requires caution as well. There's also caution with respect to tight clothing, both for men and for women. That covering one's awrah tightly generally is disliked, and if it's tight such that it is considered immodestly tight, or such that it defines the limb completely, that is considered to be sinful. Okay? So tightness, covering one's awrah tightly generally is considered disliked. If it would be such that it's considered immodest, or it's such that it defines the shape of the awrah completely, it would be considered prohibitively disliked. And this applies particularly to the area between navel. I mean, for the man, the whole area of the awrah between navel and knee, and for women particularly, the chest, between chest and knees, right? Particularly, but this is something that people are very remiss on, both in terms of men and women. With men, a lot of people wear trousers that are very tight, right? And that's considered, or that the legs themselves may not be tight, but the mid area is tight, and that's not considered dignified. It is considered disliked, may well be sinful, right? Whether from front or rear. The sunnah is for one to cover one's awrah in a manner that is considered loose, modest, and dignified. Loose, modest, and dignified, which is why, particularly we see that the Prophet, for example, used to wear a qamis, like a long shirt, because it covers that area in a loose manner. Or if one wearing trousers, it would be superior to wear whether it be a long shirt or a jacket or something, and that's why for men that would be from the sunnah to wear something that drapes over one's mid area in a loose manner, and that's why women are there's two commands that relate to to women's dress that are mentioned in the Quran. One is that for them to don the khimar, right? And the khimar is that which, because during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, before revelation, women would frequently cover their hair, but they would tie the scarf behind their necks, right? So the neck area and the chest area would not be covered by the scarf. But Allah subhanahu, the command in the Quran is for that, top covering, like what we call the hijab, to cover one's head and to be draped over one's front, one's chest area. That's one. The second command is the jilbab, and the jilbab is an outer garment. Right? The jilbab is that which covers over the body in a loose manner. Right? In a loose manner. So the jilbab is not necessarily a jilbab. Okay? So actually, when I was in Jordan, very interesting. A lot of the clothing companies in Jordan had investors from one of their neighbors to the west. It's very interesting. And there's conspiracy theories abounding, but God knows whether they're true or not. But anyways, there's a phenomenon of very tight jilbabs. That may be called a jilbab, but it's not legally a jilbab. Right? But that's something that both commands are ignored. There's actually no command for a woman to wear hijab as the word. Right? The commands are specifically the command to cover one's awrah, and we know what the awrah is. And the other is, in terms of how one properly covers one's awrah, one is the khimar, and khamr is that which covers over something. Ma yakhmuru shay, which is that which covers, which is why wine is called khamr, because it's yakhmuru al-aql, because it covers the mind. Right? It makes you drunk, right? So that's the function of the hijab. So some of these sculpted hijabs, it does cover the awrah, but it does not do so in the proper manner. Right? So that's one Quranic command of the khimar. The other Quranic command of the jilbab, right? Which is the jilbab is an outer garment, right? The outer garment, and that can be fulfilled in a myriad of ways, right? But having, but the same, but for men as well, and that's why you see all traditional dress has certain characters of looseness, modesty, and there's the aspect of it being dignified, which is why it's considered improper to wear, clothing that one would not wear in front of respected people outside. Right? But that's in terms of adab and completeness. Any questions here? Go ahead.
Someone had a scarf that, on top of the head was very tight. Is that considered
No, I mean on the head. I mean the nature, unless you puff it up or something. Like like how can you cover the head loosely? Like you're not expected to, like there's some things that are inevitable. And I've had, I'm actually advisor to a particular Muslim clothing company, and both its owners, are God-fearing individuals, but we've had extensive, more detail than anyone would need to get into, because people would object to different dress that they'd have. There's some things like, can you tell that I have a shoulder, right? I mean, the fact that I'm wearing something, right? It's like how, unless, you puff it up or something. There's some things that are, I mean, the fact that, if someone's like this wide, their clothing will indicate that they're that wide or maybe a little more. And if someone's this wide, their clothing will indicate that they're that wide or a little more. Just avoid making it a little less, right? Right, like, so one avoids tight clothing, right? And there's ways of modesty, and and that's what, and how you fulfill that, the door is wide. But for men, one should be careful. Like, if you're wearing trousers, choose loose trousers. And if it is not loose around the mid area, which is not that simple with regular trousers, then wear something that covers over the mid area. That will be considered from the sunnah, right? That's why actually in many countries there's a beautiful tradition. If you go to Malaysia or Indonesia, in a lot of the masajid, actually they have it in Cape Town, which still retains its Malay Islamic culture. You go to a musalla, they have long jackets for men. A lot of people are wearing trousers and stuff. So they have it in Turkey in many of the masajid as well. You go to like the fundamentalist heartland of Istanbul, like Ismail Agha, they have these long coats, right? And that's dignified, right? You wear a long coat because you're worshiping Allah. You do it in the best way possible. You wouldn't go to a job interview well, you might in some sectors now, but you wouldn't just go wearing a t-shirt and here I am, interview me, right? You're standing before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you do so in the most befitting manner. So Sayyidina Umar saw someone praying in basically what amounted to their pajamas, and he asked him, why are you praying like that? He said, because Allah sees what's in my heart. He said no, but when you said, would you go in front of respected people like that? He said no. Said why in the world would you stand before the Lord of the worlds like that? Right? So there's that aspect as well. But the basis of that of why the male Sahaba asked the Prophet why what about covering one's nakedness in private? And the Prophet, and this hadith is in Abu Dawood and elsewhere, the Prophet said, Allahu ahaqqu an yustaha minhu min an-nas. Allah is more deserving of one's modesty, one's shyness than people are. Right? I don't know what people think, but the number of people ask me, someone actually asked me, verbally, can I prance about naked in my own house? And in the Hanafi school, it's wajib to cover one's basic nakedness, even when one's alone, except when there's a need or benefit to the contrary. The basic nakedness for both men and women is navel to knee. That is wajib to cover. Unless there's a need. You're changing your clothes, you're showering, during sexual relations, etc. But in each of those cases, the sunnah is to reduce the extent and duration of the uncovering. Generally, right? This is considered an adab. Which is why when we change clothes, how do we change clothes? What's the sunnah of changing clothes? Is to sit down. Because that reduces the extent of uncovering. Even how you put on your clothes, the sunnah is, if you look at the various hadiths that describe the dressing of the Prophet ﷺ, what do you put on first? That which more completely covers your awrah. Which depends on what you're wearing, right? And you take off first that which leaves less of your awrah uncovered. Right? So that you maximize covering and minimize uncovering. And you sit down because less of your awrah shows. Similarly in showering, these are subtleties, these are not obligations, but in showering, the Prophet ﷺ is generally understood to have sat while performing his ghusl. Okay? And it's considered an adab to have at least one's mid-area covered during showering. It's not an obligation, it's not an emphasized sunnah, but it's an adab. First time I heard about that, I was like, that's strange. And so it's sort of like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to send a lesson. 4 classes that day, same issue came up. Actually, it came up during the khutbah. Only time I've heard something that I mentioned in the khutbah. Shaykh Mustafa, at a morning class, it was mentioned. I was like, that's strange. Went to Jumu'ah prayer, Shaykh Mustafa Turkmani mentioned that in passing, because talking about adab and dignity and modesty, even that the righteous used to keep their mid area covered, even in the shower. I was like, Then I had a class after Jummah, it was mentioned there. And in the evening, in a class on spirituality, at Sidi Abu Munir's house, it was mentioned there. That's okay, khalas, I surrender. Right? But these are matters of, of dignity. Right? And why do we do it? The Prophet put it, like why do we choose, in dress? The first consideration is to cover. The second consideration is modestly. Right? And modesty in covering is directly related to it being loose. Right? It applies to both men and it applies to both men and women. Right? And one chooses the clothing that is according. And then in a dignified manner. One of the things that, since we're just talking about dress for a moment, that is makruh, and according to some scholars is haram, it's called libasu shuhra. Libasu shuhra is dressing in a way that would unnecessarily cause you to be singled out. Unnecessarily, right? Wrongfully singled out, right? Or sort of deservingly singled out, right? That you're dressing in a way that you could see why they're singling you out. So sometimes people decide to quote unquote dress Islamic, but they look like a slob, right? And that would be makruh. I say, when is it makruh to wear Islamic dress? So when you do it in a way that would unnecessarily cause you to stand out. And the Hanbalis were more literally inclined than the other schools. They take this very seriously. Ibn Badran, who was one of the great imams of the Hanbali school in the last 100 or so years, he actually says that, in non-Muslim lands, for example, wearing things that would cause you unnecessarily to stand out. Because there's some things that if you stand out, you're covering your awrah in a dignified way, and you stand out, you're just doing what you have to do. But to do it in a way that causes you unnecessarily to stand out could be either makruh or even haram. So I used to go to the Bay Area, I had some students who were taking class with me. I used to make a condition. I said, you only dress in one land's clothing. We had the one land rule. Some of these guys, they'd be wearing like a Mauritanian, that turquoise blue thing, but then they'd be wearing like Nike boots with jeans on top, and they'd be wearing like a shalwar underneath it, and like all kinds of wacky things. I said, look, if you want to dress Indian, dress Indian. If you want to dress like Senegalese, dress Senegalese. If you want to wear like track pants, wear track pants, but don't combine them with other things, right? Because dignified dress is part of the sunnah of the Prophet. The Prophet wore all kinds of different clothing, but it was all. Sometimes he had clothing, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that wasn't his size. That's all he had to wear. There's times where he had to actually struggle to put his hands through his clothing, right? Because that's all he had to wear, right? Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But it was always dignified clothing, right? It was always dignified clothing. He wore it in a dignified manner. Go ahead.
What would be the situation if you didn't have enough material to cover your aura?
If you don't have enough material to cover your aura, you cover what you can, right? You cover what you can. In that situation, if you're not obligated to go outside, you're not allowed to go outside. So if a man is stuck at home and all they have is boxer shorts and they're not quite long enough, then you have to stay home until you can figure out how to wear more clothing, right? And you don't have to wear clothing. Right? You could take like a bed sheet and wrap yourself in it or whatever else. Like that, alhamdulillah, that's rarely an issue. But the fuqaha discuss it, that if you look in the longer works there in Nur al-Ilah, that if you're completely naked, you have no clothing, how do you pray? You pray sitting down and you cover, and then they differ. You cover your front private parts or your rear private parts. Right? And they discuss that. But that, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us afiyah and save us from such problems. Although I have a friend who, subhanAllah, he went to take a shower and he had, all his clothes were piled by his bed. So his friend got fed up, so he took all the clothing to get it. Said they had this little washing machine. So he took all the clothing to get it washed at a laundry place. But he took absolute, because all the, like, barring no exceptions, was there in the bedroom. So my friend was left just with a towel, literally. And there were students of knowledge, they didn't have very much in the house. So I was walking to the masjid and my friend just stuck his head out and said, "See, Faraz, I have a problem." I said, "What?" He said, "I don't have any clothes." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "I only have a wet towel. How do I?" And the towel didn't cover the awrah either. "How do I pray?" And it was Jummah prayer. He said, I can't even go to Jummah. And I was running late. I said, "Figure it." I actually just went and prayed Jummah. I didn't believe him. I thought he was just making excuses. But it was real. But those are rare situations, right? He actually figured it out. He took the curtain off, wrapped himself in the curtain, but it was stiff, so he held onto it, but he fell a couple of times. Go ahead. Yes. So the conditions have to be fulfilled. These conditions have to be fulfilled within there are different types of conditions, but broadly, a condition needs to be fulfilled when you begin the prayer and needs to remain during the prayer. Generally, like the time is a bit different, but right. So if you find yourself that when you got up, your chest moved away from the, you have to move back, right? So if your awrah gets uncovered, you have to cover it back immediately. And if you do it immediately, it doesn't break your prayer. But if it's uncovered excessively, which is more than the extent of 3 tasbihs, often inexcusable amount, right? So slight uncovering, or slight getting uncovered is excused even for a lengthy time. Right? Excessive uncovering is only excused for a short time. A short time being the extent of 3 tasbih. Say Subhanallah, Subhanallah, Subhanallah. Right? What's slight? They say a quarter of a limb. There's an interesting answer online by Shaykh Suhail Hanif, and he was still a young teacher at that time when he answered. The question was, what if some of my hair starts showing in the prayer? So he decided to explain all the limbs, because the fuqaha describe every single limb. So he went through the whole body. As for the buttocks, what if if a quarter of one each like he went into. I told, look, the person just asked, what if some of my hair starts showing? And you're talking about like. But I want it to be thorough. It's a thorough answer, like actually more thorough than you'd ever want to know. In general, each part of the body, each specific area of the body, and you could probably guess 90% of it is considered on its own. Everything that is separable is separated. Everything that's considered together. A quarter of it or less, so a quarter of the front of the head would be excused. It's not permitted to uncover, but if it gets uncovered, it is excused. 4, less than a quarter is excused in terms of validity, even for a lengthy time. More than a quarter is excused only for a short amount of time. Go ahead. Yeah, there's a couple of answers on Seekers that detail it. The jilbab is something that one wears that covers one's body loosely, right? So, and normally, but it's not necessary. Normally, and does it have to be separate from other clothes? So one's wearing other clothing and one has a jilbab on top of it. It's not so. That's not so straightforward, especially if you look at the precedent. The fuqaha, they looked at the precedent of the time of the Prophet, because there many people only had one garment that they had to cover, right? So it's that which covers one's body in a loose manner, right? That covers over one's body. The optimal case is that it'd be over other things, because that is more modest. But how that's fulfilled, there's someone, if they're wearing, there's numerous ways that can be fulfilled. There's numerous ways that can be fulfilled.
What if one was unaware of one of their, like their aura being exposed, and it was pointed to them later after the prayer? Does that mean that they have to?
What if someone corrects you about something? I mean, if one's soft-headed, just one listens and deals with it. If only one person tells you, then you only have to listen to them if they're upright, reliable, and sure. They're upright, reliable, and sure. Like a kid comes to you and says, "Your aura was uncovered, uncle." That's ma'asalam. Right? So, upright, reliable, and sure. If two people tell you, then that's stronger proof, right? But normally, there's no reason to doubt them. But also one sees, one assumes that one assumes one's own validity. Right? So I think maybe your aura was uncovered. He says, really? And they ignore them and move on. But if they're sure, then one acts with it. But once one person says it, especially if they don't know, just ignore them. Someone went to Shaykh Abdul Razak al-Halabi, led prayer at the Haram. He said I heard this from one of his students. And some Indian person came up to him and said, "Shaykh, you left the wajib action of the prayer." Shaykh Abdul Razak, who's had the temperament of a faqih, looked at him and said, "Do you know the wajib actions of the prayer?" He said, "No." He said, "Uskut." He said, "Be quiet." And he walked away. So, if you don't know what the wajib actions of the prayer, how can you? What are you doing? Tell me I left one of them. Okay, because if he left it, that it's not just for himself. He left all these people. So if I'm going to act on that, then I'm going to confuse a whole bunch of people. It's good. Be quiet. Right. Go ahead.
So I was just wondering for the prayer, in the clothing aspect, there's different opinions that I've heard considering what's wajib and necessary in prayer. So does the material have to be from the head all the way to the ankles, or can you be wearing trousers?
No one can wear multiple things, right? One could wear multiple things, right? That's not. I mean, there are opinions that say no. The jilba, the khimar covers from head till name a part of the body, everything from to the chest, to the mid area, to mid thigh, to knee. Some say all the way to the toes, like one, right? Those are multiple opinions. The Quranic, there's the obligation is to cover one's aura. Number one. Number two, that's the obligation. Anything. If someone took masking tape and tied themselves as a mummy, right? And everything was covered, their aura is considered covered. As long as while they're walking, masking tape doesn't open up, right? Whether you're a man or a woman, right? If your aura is covered, if you plastered yourself in mud and it was thick enough that none of your skin is showing, your aura would be considered covered. But what would the problem with that be? What? That's as skin tight as it gets. That would be sinful. So how can you be fully covered yet it be sinful? Right? There's many instances. One is that. The sunnah, the proper way is that it be done in a way that is loose and modest. Right? That it not be tight, but rather that it be modest and then loose, right? In that order of priority. How that's done, and you see there's numerous different, in traditional cultures, there's all kinds of different ways that's done, right? Because there's not a specific manner that's obligatory. The two matters, the idea of the khimar, right? Which that covers one's head and is draped over one's chest area, and the idea of the jilbab, which is that which one wears, that covers one's body loosely. Those, but the jilbab is not a specific dress that does that, but what is considered a jilbab is certainly superior for obvious reasons. And then there's other, or things that would be considered, legally equivalent to that of different types of dress. Wallahu alam. Then we'll take questions after we just finish the conditions. Facing the Qibla is very straightforward. There's only two situations. If you can see the Kaaba itself, then you face it directly. If you can't see the Kaaba itself, then you face the direction. And the fuqaha would say if you can see the Kaaba itself with your own eyes. And they define it in that way, because if you can see the Kaaba on the TV screen, that's not seeing the Kaaba. That's seeing a transmitted image of the Kaaba, right? If you can see the Kaaba itself with your own eyes. Then they'd be, because they say, what if there's a miracle and you can see the Kaaba, but in other than in its direction? They say, well, spiritually there may be some reasons why you're seeing it in other than its direction, but you face if you can't see the Kaaba itself with your own eyes, then you face its direction. Right? What if you're unsure? You do your best. You do your best. You exercise a reasoned judgment. It's praiseworthy to learn, and in the next class, in the next course, we'll look at a little more on how you determine the Qibla, but you should develop a sense of how to figure out the Qibla, right? And don't be too sure of digital devices, because they're, at least as things stand right now, they're not that, especially indoors, they're not that accurate necessarily. There's a lot of things that would interfere with them. So it's good to have a sense of where you are. Right? Like in Toronto, for example, like which way is north, which way is south. One should have a sense of spatial awareness. And then which way would the Qibla be? Where's the sun, right, etc. So that one can have a general sense. What if there's no one around and your phone's dead and you're at you're somewhere, so you can make. But if you have no clue, you do your best. Say, well, we flew in this way, so that you make a general guess, and that would be enough. The fifth condition is time, and this has two aspects. The first is that the time have entered, and the second, that one believed it entered, that one thinks it's in. So, so if one thought the time was in, but it actually wasn't, then that prayer would not be valid. So you thought Isha time was in, you prayed, then you realized that Isha time wasn't in. That would not be valid, because you believed it entered, but it actually hadn't. But let's say you're feeling really lazy, and say, I'm just going to pray Isha before going to sleep, even though Isha time is not in. So you prayed it that way, but then it turned out it had actually, once you finished, Isha entered half an hour ago. But because you didn't believe it was in, it would not be sufficient. Well, this is a rare case, right? Practically, follow reliable timetables, right? Follow reliable timetables. And you should also know how to tell it. It's actually really simple. When is it Fajr time? Just look outside, right? When is it Dhuhr? It's not that difficult to figure out. Asr, Maghrib. And this helps as well. How do you pray on a plane, for example? Where's the prayer timetable for where you're at? Right? There's some apps that try to figure that out. It's very simple. Right? When is it Isha time? When is it Maghrib? When the sun sets. Just look outside, you can tell. Right? Right? When is it Isha? When it goes dark. When the first light starts appearing, it's Fajr. Dhuhr doesn't vary very much in most places. Like, if you pray at like 1:30 relative to where you're in most places, the time will be in. But you can tell. There's minimal, there's only minimal shadow. Asr, when the sun is You're getting closer towards setting, but it's not close to setting yet. And then we go back to Maghrib, right? So it's quite straightforward to figure those out. Was there a question? Go ahead.
Regarding dressing properly in public, would that count, like, for example, since we live in a Western country, if someone were to cover modestly, like, and allow that in clothing or anything, would that be considered, like, gathering attention to what you say?
No, I mean, that depends on circumstance, right? That depends on circumstance. They say in general, if one is acting upon the sunnah in accordance with the sunnah, then even if, some people object, then that's not objectionable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Right? So if someone were wearing an izar and a qamis, as described in the Shama'il of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we're not called up, but someone's doing that and doing that properly, that's not objectionable inside, because that's how the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam dressed. But the condition to ask is that, are you doing it in a dignified manner? If you're doing it in a dignified manner, it's going to be impressive. Okay? I was at the San Francisco airport. We were seeing off Habib Omar, and Sidi Osama Cannon had one of the most difficult moments in his life, because these two Mexican women came up, and I was standing back. I was talking to Shaykh Yahya and Sidi Mustafa Davis, and these two Mexicans, and they started saying, speaking in Spanish, that tell him to pray for us, etc. They wanted to give him a hug. So this Sidi Osama's Shaykh, so he was sort of, like one would come up, the other one would start talking. So he was like playing defense. Like he was sort of blocking between Habib Omar and these two Mexican ladies, because they wanted to give him a hug and they wanted to kiss his hand. But he's just standing there, and he's like, he's an ambassador for the divine, right? Like he's looking at, like, yeah. But the sunnah is impressive if acted upon in a dignified manner, right? But some people say, okay, just because we're not following social, like the standards of society or whatever, we can look like we just fell out of bed and rolled into a lot of clothing and into a lot of cloth and walked outside. That's not sunnah, right? That's not sunnah. But broadly, we see from the sunnah that consideration of, that one upholds the sunnah with consideration of the general and specific circumstances one is in, right? How that's done, there's a lot of leeway in that. Right? So there's general guidelines, and there's specific choices that people that people make, and al-amr wasi', and the matter is vast in that. So let's look at the conditions, the sixth condition, which is intention. We've talked a little about intention before, and its merit. The basis of what is the basis for the obligation of intention in the Hanafi school? What's the basis of the obligation of intention? Where do Allah or His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam tell us about the requirement of intention with respect to our actions? Anybody? Yes. Innam al-a'mal. There's a trick question, and Jazakallah khair for jumping right into my trick. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Innam al-a'malu bin-niyat." Truly, actions are by their intentions. Wa innama likulli imri'in ma nawa. And each person shall have whatever they intended. That is not considered the nas, the decisive text in the issue. Why? Go ahead. There's a part missing there. What? Yeah. So there's two things. Firstly, this is not a decisive text in its transmission. It's a sahih hadith, so it's necessary to accept this as a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. But it's not established decisively. It's established strongly, but not decisively. It's not qat'i. So not qat'i thubut. It's not decisively established. But it's strongly established. There's no question about it. One has to accept it, but it's not decisive. Because only narrated by Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, right? And then it became famous later in the transmission, but not. Number two, it's what it indicates is not decisive. It says truly actions are ... by their intentions. There's something necessarily implicit. And anytime you have to interpret what is implicit, that makes the text itself not decisive. So it's a central hadith, but it's not decisive. For the Hanafis, that hadith is understood in its meaning by the decisive Quranic text, which is from Surah Al-Bayyinah, the 98th Surah, verse 5, وَمَا أُمِرُوا إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ مُخْلِصِينَ لَهُ الدِّينَ. They were only commanded that they submit to Allah, that they worship Allah, لِيَعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ مُخْلِصِينَ لَهُ الدِّينَ, making their deen sincerely for Allah alone. Okay. And the deen there refers to all that all that one is to seek Allah through. So there's directly, which is worship, and all other actions in terms of encouragement. So that's for the 98th Surah, verse 5. That's the decisive text, and the hadith is understood in light of that. So we understand that the hadith is reiterating the obligation to have intention that is affirmed in the Quranic verse. The Shafi'is get quite shocked by that way of looking at it. But it's not, so the definition of intention is قصد الطاعة والتقرب إلى الله عند إيجاد الفعل. Right? It is resolved to perform an act of obedience and to draw closer to Allah at the beginning of the action. So one has to have an intention. Any deliberate action, intention is assumed. You're praying. Why are you praying? Because you decided to pray. That decision is your intention. Why you're washing your limbs in the washroom or wherever else? Why are you doing it? Any deliberate action, the intention is assumed. So if you doubt your intention, you ignore the doubt. Simple as that. Because it is normally inconceivable that a deliberate action will be done in a specific manner without intention. So when you have a doubt, you ignore the doubt. If you have waswasa, you don't think about anything anyways. You just keep going ahead. Because even if you have waswasa, if you have misgivings, it says sahibul waswasati la dhanna lahu. The person who has waswasa, who has misgivings, not only do they ignore doubts, they ignore even possibilities that appear strong to them, that are dhann. Sahibul waswasa la dhanna lahu. What you're supposed to do, you just keep doing it. And you ignore not only doubts, but you even include possibilities that appear strong. Because anything else for the person of waswasa is imposition of hardship. And then there's two aspects to the intention. Right? There is the resolve to do the action, and the other aspect which relates to reward is the extent of the meaning of seeking to draw closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the action. And that's the spiritual potential of the prayer. And when does one have the intention? At the beginning of the action. The only nuance is that we have multiple obligatory prayers. So in the obligatory prayer, one needs to specify which one you're praying. But even with that, at dhuhr time, if you're praying and then you suddenly realize, did I intend dhuhr? What do you assume firstly? Yes. Number two, at dhuhr time, what else would you be praying? And even if you get the word wrong, what counts is the meaning. Because some people get confused. So at asr time, say, I intend dhuhr for the sake of Allah, Allahu Akbar. If you pause time there, say, what did you mean? Say, oh, I meant asr. It's the meaning that counts, not the words. So even if you said it wrong, the assumption is, right, unless you're really confused, right? You got up and you're groggy because you took some medication and you intended it wrong, that's different. When in doubt, you always assume validity. The proper thing to do is to pause. One of the important sunnahs that's often ignored is what's called istihdarun niyya, is to bring to mind one's intention. So that's why the adab is that when one stands to give the opening takbir, one pauses for a moment. One brings to mind the intention, and then one begins. One doesn't dive into an action, but rather one aligns oneself first, and then one dives, so that you do it right. So you pause, right? You ask yourself, what am I doing? I'm praying dhuhr. Why am I doing it? For the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then you magnify that intention. So what, why, and then magnify. And then you say Allahu Akbar. Right? And that applies to every action. In every action, part of what the Prophet ﷺ said when he said that التأني لا يأتي إلا بخير, that thinking things through, circumspection, brings only good, and haste is from the devil. Thinking things through has several aspects. One of them is that thinking about is making the sincere intention before the action brings only good. Because otherwise, if you hasten into the action, it's from the shaitan. You did something good, but you didn't have the intention behind it, or you didn't have a high intention behind it, or you failed to or you didn't have a sincere intention, or you didn't magnify it. So each of those, the shaitan either tricked you completely, or he made you slip, you stumble, or if you didn't make you stumble, you at least slipped in your intention. So in everything, the greatest moment in life is when you make a sincere intention. Before anything, you drink a sip of water, that action could be beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? If you had a sincere intention. You drank it for the sake of Allah, out of gratitude, out of thanks, to give your body its rights, to appreciate Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's blessings, to intend to direct the drinking of water towards the good, and to drink in accordance with the sunnah. So one makes multiple intentions. And likewise with the prayer. So that's the intention. And we have a reader on sincerity and intentions on Seekers, and inshallah if we can put it under the resources for this class and read it. And you can just go to the Seekers site, reader, sincerity, intentions, you'll find it. This is one of the things this is what is spirituality? They say spirituality is purity of intent, right? That is what. And the intention has two aspects. One is istihdarun niyya, is to bring to mind an intention, and to make it sincere and to magnify it, beginning of the action. And then the second sunnah related to intention is istishabun niyya, is to sustain one's intention. That meaning that one began the prayer with, carrying it throughout the prayer, that is fulfilling the divine command as commanded. That at every moment in the prayer, if you can say that I'm praying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, seeking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the levels of seeking, okay? And you can sustain that meaning throughout, as manifest in the different phases of one's action. That really is what spirituality is. And then one gives the opening takbir. The opening takbir is a condition of the prayer. The opening takbir is a condition of the prayer, not an integral, according to the stronger position. Because it's not part of the prayer itself, but rather it's like the door. Is the door from the inside of the house? If you analyze it legally, the door and the takbir are legally equivalent. They say the door of the house is from the outside of the house, but it resembles something that's part of the inside of the house itself. Because it has a meaning of insideness as well. Right? Because it's ما يتوصل به إلى داخل البيت. Because it's the means for you to enter inside the house itself. So the opening invocation is a condition that resembles an integral. there's a legal aspect to it, just to be rigorous in one's thinking. There's a practical aspect which is not normally manifest. Don't do this, please. If you said Allahu Akbar before the time enters, and you paused and did nothing else, and then waited for the time to enter, and then began the other actions of the prayer, what would be the ruling of your prayer? It'd be valid, but you'd be sinful. Right? So don't do it, because you don't deliberately commit sin. But if someone did, like Fajr time is about to come in, and you're like, I need to pray. Say Allahu Akbar, but they say, time's not in. I'm not going to break your prayer. You just waited. You waited, and when you know the time is in, you said Subhanakallahumma bihamdik. Right? It will be valid. But you just committed a sin. So don't do it. But if it happened, you prayed like that and then you went to sleep. You go in the morning to Usada Zubaydah, who, because Zubayr never married her, decided to become a scholar. And so you ask Shaykh Zubaydah, what's the ruling of my prayer? She said, it's valid. You ask her, was it sinful? She said, of course. So what do I do? And if you appear to be a religious person, you say, pray it again. If you're just like lost and confused, she said, hope you have a good day. Right? And then the wajib is to say Allahu Akbar. Because the divine command is takbir, is to magnify Allah. Right? وَرَبَّكَ فَكَبِّرْ. And your Lord, magnify. Right? So, but the wajib is to say Allahu Akbar. But technically, any dhikr that has the pure meaning of takbir in it would be valid. The pure meaning of takbir is that it is a كل ذكر خالص لله تعالى لا يشوبه معنى الطلب والدعاء. It is every act of remembrance that is purely for Allah, purely to mention Allah, without any meaning of asking or reliance or dua. So you could say Allahul A'zam and start. But you couldn't say Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Because Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim is dhikr, but it has the meaning of seeking assistance. But if you said Allahul A'zam, you said Allahur Rahim, the fuqaha said that, so it's as if you're asking from Allah's mercy, so that's questionable. But if you did that, you'd be sinful, so don't do it. Say Allahu Akbar, because it's wajib. If you said anything else, if valid, it would be sinful. Right? But so why do they mention it? Because people do wacky things. And if someone comes and does a wacky thing, right? Someone was sitting there saying, Ya Azim, Ya Azim, Ya Azim. They're making a lot of dhikr. And then you say, Allahul Azim. They come and ask you. I prayed, I said Allahul Azim. Firstly, the first thing to always question people's imagined certainty. Someone said, I said Allahul Azim. Are you sure? Says no. So then assume you said Allahu Akbar. Right? Simple. Because people, when people are confused, they have imagined certainty. And it's not real certainty, it's just imaginary. Someone tells you, or you think to yourself, whenever I'm going to make wudu, I have blood in my mouth. Really? Come on. So because when people it's like a type of delusion. What's a delusion? It's a doubt that appears real to you. So then people come out, they say, don't accept your own imagination like that. Question it. If you're confused, seek clarity by asking. So these are so just say Allahu Akbar, right? And say it within the time, right? So just don't be confused. Say it within the time. Because the other conditions can be fulfilled outside the time, right? Except for the time itself. There's other aspects as well related to this. Do the conditions have to be said when you're waking? What if someone was asleep and they say Allahu Akbar? That's unlikely. Don't even get into that one. I'm not going to tell you the ruling about that.
Why is it sinful to do the takbir before
Why is it sinful to do the takbir before the time is in? Because إِنَّ الصَّلَاةَ كَانَتْ عَلَى الْمُؤْمِنِينَ كِتَابًا مَوْقُوتًا. Truly the prayer has been written for the believers in duly apportioned times. There's a clear starting time, clear ending time. And the takbir, though a condition resembles an integral. Like the door is not disconnected from the house, right? It's like, a door is something you should ask philosophers about. Tell me about the door, right? And then walk away, because they'll keep talking. You could spend a lot of time talking about the door. Go ahead.
Regarding the times of prayer, if you're fasting and you're just eating your food and the time of Fajr comes in, but it's like 1 minute later, and then you just realize, is your fast
So, if with respect to time, time and Fajr, Imam Nawawi mentions that there's consensus of the Muslims that you cannot eat anything deliberately or accidentally from the moment Fajr enters until Maghrib time. There's consent, and all those who talk about consensus have affirmed that very clearly. But there are hadiths that describe that, if you're still eating and the adhan is given, finish what you're eating. But how is that understood? It's understood in the light of, because you have to put all the texts together. You can't take one text on its own. During the time of the Prophet ﷺ, specifically for Ramadan, 2 adhans used to be given. There's many hadiths about this. Sayyidina Bilal and Sayyidina Ibn Maktoum, the famous blind Sahabi, radiallahu ta'ala anhuma, they used to both give adhan. One used to give the adhan before Fajr time to indicate that now is the time to stop. This is the waqt al-imsak. But this is a recommended time. And the second would give the adhan to indicate that the time is now in. The hadiths about continuing to eat if you have something in your mouth relate to the first adhan that would be given, which would be before the time. Because it's encouraged to stop eating at that time, but not obligatory. So you have something in your mouth, you finish eating it before the recommended time. No one of consequence said you could eat once the time is in. So if the time is in, and you ate deliberately, your fast is broken. You ate accidentally, your fast is broken, because accidents break the fast, as we'll see. Now, there's a slight nuance where we have some leeway in that there's more than one opinion about when Fajr time enters. 18 degrees gives an earlier time, 15 degrees gives a later time. We'll look at that separately, but practically, at the level of operational taqwa, you should stick to one time. If you take the 18 prayer time, which is 18 degree prayer time, which is more cautious, if you take that, stick to it. And if you stick to it, meaning if you ate something after that forgetfully or accidentally, then you hold yourself to it. If you take the more expansive time, 15 degrees, which has a basis as well, especially in the Hanafi school, then you stick to its implications, right? But because of that shubha, that doubt, even if you ate deliberately, that would not require, that would not require a kafara, an expiation. If you previously followed the opinion that floats around, which goes against not only all 4 schools, but against transmitted ijma, that you can just finish eating what's on your plate, not only on your mouth, what's on your plate, right? So one of the Mashaykh said, while you're at it, get some dessert too. And then, drink some water just to clear your mouth. Like that does not have basis. Don't cause fitna. When you see people are confused, you deal with the root cause, which is religious unawareness. But those things give a shubha. the fact that it's scholars, or people considered scholars at least, are saying it, that makes it a matter that you don't have to go immediately and condemn or whatever, but rather you deal with the root cause, which is spreading sound, reliable knowledge. We do not create fitna. The Sahaba did not create fitna, right? Rather, one rectifies. So that's what we can mention. We're going to look at the integrals next. We expanded on these conditions because it's important, right? You can just read the book on your own, right? You can just read the book on your own. We're trying to understand this in a thorough manner, and of the most, if we wanted to highlight two particularly important things here, the first is proper covering, right? Proper covering, both at the level of obligation and also at the level of the sunnah, right? The sunnah, they say, لا يستهين بالسنة إلا جاهل. No one disregards the sunnah except someone who's ignorant, right? So one should, there's values in the sunnah that are important, right? And we touched upon. So that's important to take clearly. And why does one do it? It's not complicated, right? One of the amazing aspects of the sunnah is, part of the ease of the religion, is that life is very complicated. Right? Life is very complicated. If you understood what it means to make a decision, every decision should be crippling, because you do not know all the considerations, circumstances, and consequences of your decision related to your choice. You cannot know them. So you cannot make the perfect decision. It's not possible for the human being to make a perfect decision on their own. So it's crippling. That's why a lot of intelligent people find it very difficult to make decisions in life. Because they're smart. They see, some people can almost see all the issues that relate to something. You think these are all the considerations, all the circumstances, all the potential consequences. How in the world can I make a decision? But, and sometimes that's why some of the most sincere people have tremendous difficulty in making right choices. Because say, what if I'm not sincere? What about this? What about this? What about... The simple thing to ask oneself in the decision is, what will be pleasing to Allah? When it's clear, do it. When you're not clear, seek clarification. Consider and clarify, and then just do that. What will be pleasing to Allah, given those factors, and that's it. Right? And that's part of Allahu ahaqqu an yustaha minhu min an-nas. Allah is more deserving of one's sense of haya, modesty, than people are. Right? But one upholds it in a manner that is considerate of circumstances. That's one key area, and it's important to reflect on that in one's own personal practice. The other aspect is sincerity, and that's something one should read up on further, and we'd highly recommend the section on sincerity in Riyadh al-Salihin. There's a whole number of hadiths in there, to read the hadiths related to that. And Imam Nawawi in the opening mentions the key Quranic texts as well. Number 2, in the Book of Assistance, the section on sincerity. And we also have the reader on Seekers on sincerity and intentions. That's important. Any last questions before we stop? Go ahead.
In regards to covering the aura, can you explain how one determines if clothing is transparent or not?
Yeah. How does one determine that clothing is transparent? They say it's from, in the normal case, at a normal distance, like when people stand like they're talking to each other from a normal distance, in normal lighting, right? That's minimally what's considered covering. That one, in normal circumstances, under normal lighting, one cannot see the color of the skin itself. Okay. There's some things that are borderline. A lot of men in the Indian subcontinent are borderline naked. Why? Because it's so hot there, right? They wear these, these really thin cotton pajamas. Thankfully, they're wearing something on top of it, so and they're like balloon big sometimes. But sometimes they wear the thinner, shalwars, whatever they're called, right? Pajama, right? That's one of the names. But so if you observe, you can make out the skin underneath. But if you cannot see the color of the skin directly, you can see just a shadow of it. That is makruh, but it doesn't. But these require, some hijabs, like they're white colored. In intense lighting, you could you can tell there's a head behind it, right? But if you cannot see the color of the hair or skin, like a skinhead hijabi sister or something, you can't see the color of the skin, the hair or the skin underneath, that would be makruh. But if you can see in normal circumstances the actual color of the skin underneath, then you're not covered. Go ahead.
For intention, one of the points was that you have to be at the beginning of the action.
Yeah.
What if you kind of have like an autopilot and you don't actually pause and not for prayer but for another action? You use that intention in the middle?
Yeah. So what if you make a subsequent intention? One is, firstly, you're assumed to have an intention, right? So you say, I didn't intend to visit my parents. No, the fact that you rang their doorbell means that you intended to visit them, right? But I didn't have a sincere intention. But why are you visiting your parents? Because I have to, right? So there's an element of sincerity that is there, right? Hope, inshallah. Like you didn't have ulterior. You didn't just go because your mom's going to give you some money or something, right? There's some good there, right? One can rectify the quality of one's intention in one's action, right? One should always, the default is one should assume that one did have an intention. The exception would be, let's say, you got up for Fajr, you normally pray your Sunnah. Can you upgrade your intention from Sunnah to Fard during the action? No. Because once you began the Sunnah of Fajr, you're praying the Sunnah of Fajr. You can't change it, say, I feel lazy. Ya Allah, this is the Fard. Right? You can't do something like that. But the fact that you're praying, so you made wudu, you're standing facing the Qibla, all these things, you made the intention. At that time, what would you be praying? Right? So, but the only thing, with the Fard one specifies it. Right? And the assumption is that if it's Maghrib time, you're praying 3 rak'ahs, and the sign of the intention is that were you to be asked, what are you doing? You could answer what it is that you're doing. Right? So one should not entertain doubt about that, except when it's obvious. Right? When it's obvious. Or sometimes one can get confused and one just made a completely wrong intention. Shaykh Zahir and I, once we went to Chicago together for this conference when we were at the university, and we just learned about combining prayers. And we're both like from Hanafi families, but at that time we're kind of a bit confused. So the two of us were going to pray, but then suddenly there's a whole bunch of people behind. So I told he wasn't Shaykh at that time, but I told Shaykh Zahir, you lead. And Shaykh Zahir's always had this presence. He said, no, you're leading. I said, okay. So I gave this long convoluted explanation, and I genuinely intended 2 rak'ahs for Maghrib. Right? And I prayed 2 rak'ahs for Maghrib. That's when, that kind of thing is problematic, right? Or you genuinely intended to pray Isha first. That's problematic, right? But in terms of the quality of the intention, one can improve it. So one intended Dhuhr, then you're praying and you're kind of, you're just praying half-heartedly, but you realize, that I need to be praying better. You shouldn't break the prayer. You should just, because you intended Dhuhr, but that's when you can upgrade the quality of your intention in terms of that. No, I need to be praying for the sake of Allah. So you renew your resolve, your focus, etc. That is improving one's intention. But the default is that if one begins an action, one does not break it, unless there's a clear reason. Like my pajama friend who prayed Fajr and realized he was wearing a kurta and no pajama, something like that, then it's not valid, so you have to break it, right? But in the normal circumstance, you do not, if you do an action, you don't break it. You just improve it. So you started doing your wudu and you say, I didn't really make a good intention, right? But you intended wudu. In what remains, make a sincere intention and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept. And He's generous. But you don't restart. Unless you're at a level of practice where, 99% of the time, or 99.5% of the time, you always have the intention, and this is a very rare circumstance, then you could go back and restart, right? But they say anytime it starts, doubts start getting repeated, you do not go back, right? And until you reach that kind of level of practice, don't, because avoiding waswasa is a major consideration. Any other question? Go ahead. What's the basis? Yeah, there's a whole number of hadiths that talk about what a man has to cover, right? Right. So there's a general command to cover in the Quran, right? The general command to cover, right? In the Quran, the specific, what specifically is awrah is detailed out in hadiths of the Prophet ﷺ. That's considered, that kind of command is considered to be non-detailed. So it is detailed out in the Sunnah. Go ahead.
You mentioned that if you believe that the time is entered and it hasn't, then it's invalid. Is that correct?
Yes.
So is it that, for example, you just wake up and you think like the time for Fajr is still there, right? Based on the lighting conditions that you see outside, and then you go ahead and pray it. Are you supposed to double check that you prayed in the right time, or what are you supposed to do in that case?
I mean, so if you pray after the time, it's valid because it counts as a makeup, right? It counts as a makeup, right? Even if you intended the current prayer, that doesn't matter. You intended to pray, and it was outside the time, so it counts as a makeup. The problem is to do it before the time. That's when it would not be valid. So the simple thing is to double check. It's to double check. And it's a rare circumstance, right? It's a rare circumstance when it wouldn't be.
But if you intended qada, like if you assume that time has expired.
Yeah, so that's they say تؤدى يعني تتأتى الأداء بنية القضاء والقضاء بنية الأداء. In usul al-fiqh, and they go into the legal basis of that a current prayer is valid to perform with the intention of qada, of making up. Because qada has a sense of fulfilling, of discharging one's duty. So in the current prayer, there's the meaning of discharging one's duty, of qada. Because you say qada ud-dayn, you fulfilled your debt, right? So that's a sense of fulfillment. So you can, dhuhr time comes in, you said nawaitu qada al-dhuhr. It would count if your intention was I meant the current prayer, that's valid. And it's also fulfilled with the intention of, you can perform a makeup with the intention of ada, which is to perform the action. That's a sense of performing that which you had been obligated to perform. So that part of the intention is excused. Right? Okay, very last question before we stop. Okay, go ahead.
With regards to the conditions, all the first 6 conditions have to be fulfilled before you do the takbir. Like say someone was facing this way and they said Allahu Akbar and they turned, would that be?
I'm not sure. So can you give the takbir not facing the qibla? I'm not 100% sure. The assumption would be that you need to be facing the qibla. I'm not 100% sure. But technically, just one side point of curiosity, what has to be facing the qibla is your chest. Someone asked my friend Shaykh Amjad Rashid about that. He says all that has to be facing, he was talking to the person, but I saw him. I know Shaykh Amjad. He was there looking at the person, he faced the qibla. So all that has to be facing the qibla when is your chest. When you say Allahu Akbar, and he's looking at the person with a smile, he said, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin. Because, right? But then, two of us actually took him down, which wasn't correct, but it isn't private. We took him down, so we invalidated his prayer. But it's, technically you could do that, but it's makruh. But he said, I had a good intention. I wanted to teach someone. We had a good intention. We wanted to teach the same person that this wasn't the right thing to do. Alhamdulillah. So we're going to stop there. Bismillah ta'ala. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina wa nabiyina Muhammad nabiyir rahma wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallama tasliman kathira.